everybody, welcome back to the next part in my Helix in the Studio series. In this episode, I'm going to do part 2 of guitar layering, which I started with obviously part 1. And I talked about some ways that I work in the studio to kind of give my productions a more professional sound by layering guitar parts. And we talked a little bit about, I don't want to go over it all again, go back and watch part 1. It's probably a good idea to watch part 1 before you watch part 2. But I talk about how I use panning and doubling of the same guitar part, possibly different guitar parts, pan them in different areas in the stereo spectrum to give kind of a wider sound to the mix. Sometimes using delay effects. So those are the things I talked about in part 1, but part 2, I actually want to take some of those ideas, expand them out more, and talk about ways we can really bring our productions to a new level. And to do that, I'm going to use an example of an actual production from my latest album. The album's called Brief Eclipse. I had the amazing fortune of working with Marco Miniman, plays drums on all the tracks. Tony Levin plays Chapman stick on one track, and my good friend Jason Henry, an absolutely mind-blowing bass player, is the bassist completing the rhythm section with Marco for the rest of the tracks. I was really happy with the way this came out, and you'll get to hear a little example. Actually, right now, just as a reminder, I have a pre-sale, pre-order on for a run of that album on vinyl, and I have the link in the description below if you guys want to kind of support me. This run will only go through if I hit 100 copies. I don't know how many are left right now. Something like 48, 49 days left on that. So go if you're interested in getting a copy on vinyl. I'd love to see that project become a real thing. But for now, I want to show you how I used some of these layering techniques that I talked about last time, along with some new ideas to create what I feel, in my opinion, was a production I was proud of. And I'm going to use the song Insufficient Tact. So this is Marco Miniman on drums, Jason Henry on bass, and then myself layering guitars on here. And every sound you hear in here is going to be made by a guitar. There's no keyboards or anything. And I'm going to show you how some of the tricks I use in the studio. And all the sounds you're hearing in this, I actually retracked this recently with my Line 6 Marketplace T-Rec Ultimate preset. So all the guitar parts you're hearing in here, other than the acoustic guitars, obviously, they were just recorded direct, is going to be from that preset, okay? All the effects and everything. There's no post-processing done in the mix, and I actually retracked them all to kind of showcase that preset. Let's go over to Cubase and take a look at what we have. So this is a bit of a big project here, as we can see. I have a lot of tracks going on. I have all of my drum tracks nested together in this folder track, so I can kind of collapse those. I have the bass guitar here, which is, like I said, from my good friend Jason Henry. I have a little bit of piano that I had on a VSTI that I just programmed, but then here's where we get going. I have rhythm guitar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now you might say, 8 rhythm guitars, that's insane. Seldom are they ever playing at the same time. That's the thing. I think in this section we're going to look at it, which is a solo section, is the time when the most are happening, and it's basically like 4 rhythm guitars, and for the most part they're playing the same thing but panned to different areas. So it's really not what you think. It's just sometimes I'll work on a section and I want a different tone, so I put that on a different track so that when I'm mixing, I don't have to worry about tweaking a track. I can kind of dedicate that to, you know, one track to all heavy overdriven rhythm guitar. Track 2, heavy overdriven rhythm guitar, pan to the other side, right? And maybe rhythm 3 is going to be something clean with a tremolo or, you know, something like that. So everything has its own space, and when you go to mix, it's a lot easier to keep track of everything in that way. So as you can see, there's a lot of rhythm guitars, but only, you know, rhythm guitar 5 and 6, just playing right here for a few bars and right here for a few bars. Rhythm guitar 7 and 8, just a little tiny thing right here. So really not a huge amount of guitar, really, just spread out over a lot of tracks. And then lead guitar, same sort of thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This guitar had a particular effect on it. This one didn't have that. You know, this is the guitar solo and this is the harmonies. I also have some acoustic guitar on here as well, down below, and we'll talk about that. And then if you notice down here, I have something called backwards guitar 1 and 2, FX1, FX2, FX3, FX4. And we'll talk about how I used all of these things to create, like what I said, I feel is a nice production. Now I'm going to zoom into this section. This is the solo section, okay? Right now I have the drums and the bass soloed, and I just want to take you guys through a run of the foundation before I start building the track out and adding all the sweeteners of guitar layering, okay? One thing though, first, for anybody who watched the first episode, I want to just show you, and I'm going to unsolo these. I'm going to show you what goes on with the original first two rhythm guitars, which happen to just be panned out hard left and right. Okay, rhythm guitars to the right, rhythm guitar 1's to the right, rhythm guitars 2 is to the left. So in the beginning, we just have this riff, which starts the song with the rhythm guitar 1 playing by itself. Rhythm guitar 2 comes in and plays the same part but an octave higher and pan to the other side. So that's kind of using one of the techniques I was talking about last time, where we pan guitars out and kind of double things or do a complementary part behind it, right? So let's go back to our guitar solo section here. We'll solo out our rhythm section. I want you guys to hear what the foundation was for this guitar solo, okay? And that goes like this, just drums and bass. Okay, so you get the idea. So how that came about is I would have been writing the song on guitar, and I would have come up with, you know, a set of chords or a riff of some sort that I wanted the drums and bass to, you know, kind of support underneath as a rhythm section. And I would have put down my drum machine parts, sent that to Marco. He would have laid down that amazing drum part based around what I did, but adding his brilliance to it. I would have then sent that to Jason, the bass player, and he would have listened to the rough sketch of bass that I came up with, whether on a VSTI or if I played it on bass. I believe this when I used the VSTI because I don't actually have a bass anymore. And he would have, as you heard, filled in his brilliance around that. It almost sounds like I have Geddy Lee playing on here, and you know, but with its own amazing twist. So Jason and Marco nailed it on this and knocked it out of the park. So when I get that back then, I said, okay, well here, let's start layering the guitars. So the main thing that I came up with first was a set of chords that I wanted to solo over. And with this part, I used a tremolo effect on it, just to give a little bit of rhythmic movement to the chords. I didn't want a busy guitar part. I wanted something that the guitar solo would be able to kind of blend in with, okay? So here's the first thing I came up with, and this is just the guitar that's going to be, if you see here, panned left 72. So not hard left, but just somewhat over to the left. And let's just play that guitar part by itself. And then those chords repeat again, okay? And like I like to do, like I talked about last time, to give the mix balance and width, I re-recorded that same part but panned them out, right? Left 72 and right 72. So those two parts together now sound like this. Okay, so those are working. Now, you'll notice too that my tremolo is timed to the beat of the song. Let me put a click track on and hear that with the beat of the song. I always like to have effects have a relationship to the song, and it locks in better with what's going on. Okay, so I'll turn the click off and let's do this. Let's solo the drums and the bass with that and hear how those work together now. Now that could have been fine to just leave it like that, but I wanted a little bit more density to the mix, something to kind of glue it all together, okay? So I decided, let's do a complementary rhythm part. This rhythm part you just heard is implying the chord changes very nicely. You can really hear what the chord changes are. But the tremolo is adding a slight rhythmic feel to it, but overall it's a very simple, sparse part. So whenever I do one simple, sparse part, I always feel like the possibility is there that I can add something that's maybe a little bit busier, right? To fill in the gaps and maybe just give it a more cohesive sound and a glue maybe to get it all kind of glued together so the solo will have something to kind of blend with. So what I did is, after a bunch of experimentation, is I came up with this part. And then that repeats. And in the same fashion of the technique I talked about last time, I want to balance that over the stereo spectrum, so I performed it twice. This time I panned them hard left and right. These initial guitar parts are panned slightly more in, so they're not stacking right on top of those ones, but you could do it any way that you feel like it would work for you. These ones are panned hard left and right, and that's what this sounds like. And again, those are performed 2 times. I like I mentioned in the first video, I like the fact that they're not perfectly together. We're not robots, right? We want to hear those little tiny changes in dynamics and in timing that help it all blend together and give it a very human quality to it. Even though this song is played and recorded to a click track, it's still going to have that human element because it's all humans playing the main parts, right? So that's what I always go for. So let's listen to that with the drums and bass now and see how that locks in. Okay, now we'll listen to that again, but I'm going to blend all of the 4 rhythm guitar parts in now, panned all out, and you're going to hear how big a sound this starts to give that backing track for me to do my solo over. And this is what this sounds like now. Drums, bass, and all those rhythm guitar parts we've listened to so far. One thing you'll notice is that that tremolo on the cleaner guitars doesn't stand out quite as much now. It just blends in, but it's those subtleties, those little tiny things that really help it to kind of just make a nice cohesive unit and a nice big sound to our production and professional sound. So that's great. So what other elements did I add to it? Well, if I keep going down, there's no more rhythm guitars. I get down here, here's my main guitar solo, and then another lead guitar. But one thing that's happening here is the acoustic guitar. And if you notice right here, we have 2 more tracks, once again panned out, but if you notice the pan on these, left 37, right 46, and I just kind of moved those in a bit. So we've got this 8th note kind of rhythm panned hard left and right. The tremoloed guitars are moved in a little bit. Now I have my acoustic guitars moved in a little bit, so everything isn't taking up the same sonic space as far as the stereo spectrum goes, okay? So let's take a listen to this and listen to what the acoustic guitar does. The reason I used the acoustic guitar is because I wanted a different timbre to the sound. I wanted something else, another element that's just going to kind of blend in a different way, right? So that's what the acoustic guitar sounds like. Nothing complicated, kind of doing a similar thing to what the rhythm guitar 3 and 4 were doing. So now let's listen to that, drums, bass, and all of the rhythm parts. Do you hear the wispiness, the air that the acoustic guitar is adding to it? Listen again, listen for that kind of upper end wispiness and air that it adds to the whole feel. So I was really liking that. So I've got a couple simple elements, doubled those up using different instruments even, or different tones. You know, you could even have done maybe one, pushed edge of distortion sound doing those single chord strums. And those single chord strums are something I do a lot to accentuate where chord changes are around a different part, you know, and those layers I found work really well. But if you did like the pushed sound with the tremolo, because this isn't a perfectly clean tone, if you listen to these guitars here. There's an edge of breakup to that. You could have maybe doubled that with a very sparkly clean guitar with a chorus maybe, you know? Layering in that way different tones, even using different guitars, right? And a lot of times I'll do that on here. I'll do like a left side with maybe my Rev Star and the right side with a Pacifica. And just to get a complementary sound, I'm using the same tone on the Helix maybe, but I'm getting a different sound because of the guitar difference, and that's going to help those sounds blend better in the mix, right? And kind of have some differences that help them sit in different sonic spaces, if you will, right? So what I decided to do though here was take the acoustic and listen to those, just those together. Okay, interesting stuff. So you'll notice that there's something else going on down here that looks a little weird. Now, one thing that I like to do is I really like to use guitars in different ways. Now, this isn't going to be exactly Helix related, because a lot of times I'll record just the guitar part and then run it through some sort of filter plugin. One of the ones that I have used a lot, and I'm not sure, I've already processed this one. There is a plugin called, and I don't even know if I have it on here at the moment, by PSP Audioware called Nitro, I believe, N2O. Yeah, I haven't used that in a while. I don't think I put it on this new computer because I haven't actually been using it. But I'll process it through to kind of create almost a keyboard type of an effect. And I always like doing funny things with guitars, but these are not main parts to the sound. But what I find in a lot of productions, it's really nice to have some sort of pad type sound underneath as just a real subtle effect underneath other parts, right? So we have the drums and bass, we have these single sort of shots of the chords kind of just sustaining. I had this little eighth note rhythmic thing, but wouldn't it be kind of neat to have some sort of keyboard pad or synth pad or string sound? And something to keep in mind is everything in the mix doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes we can just pull stuff way back, almost to the point where we don't notice it. Just sneak it in underneath the main parts, and it adds a nice kind of a glue to the sound sometimes. And that's something I use a lot. So listen to what's actually going on underneath this part. Here's what it sounds like. If you notice, the chords don't change. It's just a noise underneath, this kind of nervous, sound that I really dug and thought was really cool. And again, panned out left and right so it's in stereo, but look at where the faders are, minus 22.5. They're pulled way back in the mix. Okay, so now if I was to take that along with drums and bass, let's listen to what that sounds like, just to sort of give a relation and volume to what's going on. Do you hear how subtle that is? Let me go down here and turn those off while it's playing. Isn't that interesting? Now let's put the other elements back in. The rhythm guitars and the acoustic guitars. And then we'll do the same thing, come down here, and I'll take these in and out so you can kind of hear what's happening. Very subtle. And you know, it's going to be a personal preference thing how loud you want those. But I spend a lot of time in the mixing stage when I'm doing a project like this just to make sure that those things are adding just a little something. I don't want that to be an overt part. I just want it to be a glue. So that's my pad section. So all of this layering now, we end up with this as our bed track before I start to solo. Now keep in mind, I'm going to just get rid of this. I'm going to take out my lead guitars. Now, what we started with was this. And then I'll bring in everything else together so you can kind of hear where we went with all those layers. Pretty interesting. And I thought that gave a real nice backdrop with these different layering techniques. Now, one thing about another word about those effects sections, what you'll notice in the beginning when I played you the intro was that underneath this main guitar riff that you heard at the beginning, I also have some of these effects just like I had before. So listen to this. So that really adds a lot to that little simple riff. The other thing I layer in is a piano as well, and you'll hear what I do right here. So again, you hear this main riff with the piano, with the effects. And if you notice, I introduce elements one at a time, so it's not just hitting everybody right at once, and it kind of allows the piece to build, right? Now, speaking of building, one more thing I do is I add in this backwards guitar thing that starts with the main riff and slowly swells in. Listen to this. Now that's just me hitting a big distorted guitar chord, holding it, letting it decay out, flipping it around in my DAW, and then positioning it so that, let's listen to the drums. The drums come in right at the point where that hits its peak. Time perfectly, and that builds a lot of excitement in the track, I find. And then at that point, I add yet another effects track in. So here was the first effects track, and you'll hear right where those drums hit, you'll hear the new one come in. And then it goes away in another part, right? So some really interesting stuff. Now, if you listen to that whole intro with all of those elements, and the bass guitar comes in as well at one point, that's what this sounds like. And then on we go with other elements that come in, the melodies and whatnot. So that's how I build these tracks out so that it has a very polished studio sound to it. Let's go back to our solo. So we've heard the solo now, backing track, and here it is again. Now what I'll do at this point is usually come in and improvise a solo around it, maybe do a few takes, maybe compile something I like. Sometimes the first take is great, sometimes the third take is great, sometimes it takes longer. It just depends. But here's what I came up with solo-wise on this. And I'll just play the solo along with the backing track now so you can hear what's happening. All right, so that's a solo I came up with. Now, a lot of times I'll take that even one step further. I'll say, you know, is there any parts in the solo after I've performed it where I can maybe harmonize little ideas? So if you notice, 3 places, right here, and right here, I came in and decided to do a little harmony. So here is the part that I harmonize in the main solo. Just a couple notes. Here's what the harmony sounds like. And here's those two together. Okay, next part, I'll play both of them together. And the final harmony. And then all of that together with harmony and the entire track, all unmuted. Here's what it sounds like as a finished product after all that layering. What do you guys think? That's the finished product. So when you listen to that, I don't think you tune in right away to sort of going, wow, there's all these elements. There's acoustic, there's these 2 separate rhythm guitar parts, there's one with tremolo, there's these little effects things going on underneath as a pad. But when we put them all in the right context, pan them around in the stereo field to different places, and then put them at the right context volume-wise as well, we can create this really beautiful backdrop to do a solo around. Now again, all of those tones you hear are from my T-Rec Ultimate preset from the Line 6 Marketplace. If you like what you're hearing, you can always grab a copy of that. I really love the way these all worked in the mix. And again, there's no processing on any of these guitar parts at all. as we can see here. There's no sends, there's no inserts on them. I had on rhythm guitar 7 and 8 were my old tracks from the actual album tracks before I re-recorded these, and I just bypassed the compressors on them that I had on them before when I mixed the album. So this preset is just as you hear it, and it sat beautifully in this mix and really worked well. I was really, really happy with that. One other thing I do afterwards is I take some of the rhythms in this song here, and I do a little tag on the end of the solo, but just with acoustic guitars, and that sounds like... If we come down to our acoustics, you can kind of see what I did there. And I gave it kind of a rough, aggressive acoustic sound. I found that helped it to kind of sit in the mix. And you'll hear that little scary pad underneath come back in. So a lot of fun elements. You know, a lot of work goes into these songs to get it sitting just the way that you want, but those are some of the techniques I use, you know. So keeping in mind, the stuff we talked about in the first video, but then now talking about how we can make complementary parts. If one part is very busy, then maybe add something that's much more simple and subtle, less rhythmic possibly, maybe with some effects on it, right? Using our pan controls to pan things to different areas in the spectrum so that the whole stereo spectrum gets used and things aren't just stacked on top of one another in one spot in the stereo spectrum. Using different instrument types or different tones. In this case, I used, you know, a distorted guitar with a kind of edge of breakup with tremolo, doubled up with acoustic, and then these kind of scary sounds underneath, right, to create this nice bed that gave me a nice chord progression to then put my solo over. And again, like I mentioned in the first video, I have some delay on the leads. But it's always timed with the song. So any of those echoes, they're subtle, but they're going to fall on musically important places, not just kind of scattered all over the place. So, and that's the lead tone from the T-Rec Ultimate preset. And the guitar I used for this was my Yamaha SA2200 semi-hollow body, which I love, that guitar. What do you guys think? Is that useful to you? I thought it might be kind of fun to go through an actual production that means something to me and show how I work and how I go about being very meticulous about how I layer the guitars to get a sound. Now, this is just one example. There's so many creative ways to go with this, but I thought this might spark some ideas for others to kind of help to bring their production up to a new level. So, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, I just want to remind you, this is a song off my last album, Brief Eclipse, which is actually in pre-order now for a very limited edition, special edition vinyl pressing, which is only going to run for another, I think, 45 days or so, and I have to reach the limit. So if you guys want to go support me on that, that would be wonderful. The link is in the description below. I also have this preset available on Line 6 Marketplace. It's the T-Rec Ultimate preset. I love the way this sounds. One of my favorites, actually. And, you know, all of my presets that I sell on Marketplace, I use in my own production. So I put my money where my mouth is on those. I really enjoy them. And they sound good right out of the box. You know, it doesn't mean you can't tweak them, but they will work pretty much straight away. So that's great. So thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed that. I will be back soon with some more content. Please like the video and share it if you don't mind. Subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell notification so you get to see when I put out new videos. And I will be back soon with some more content. Thank you so much again for your time, and ciao for now.